Hi, my name is Sheamus Burns, and I'm a teacher at the Lawrenceville School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. This presentation has been prepared for the Teachers of the Future cohort through NAIS for the year 2012 to 2013. Grades. We know that grades are motivators. We know that kids can be highly motivated to get good grades by getting more points on assessments. You know it because if you're like me, you've had those students who come to you arguing for more points on a quiz or a test. Like when you're with your class reviewing a unit, and instead of arguing about the depth of their learning, they just want to know what the right answer is. The right answer for what, though? Well, that's easy. The right answer to get full credit. The educational system we find ourselves in, the one we didn't ask to be embedded in, but which we must learn to accommodate, naturally emphasizes achievement and success and recognizes grades as an indicator of that achievement and success. If we examine the system, we can learn to see how our definition of achievement has a lot to do with what we choose to measure. And the way we do that measurement has a lot to do with how our students are motivated. If we want to think about changing our system, we might start with thinking about how we design the instruments we use to measure student performance. So the question is, what are we as educators really seeking to gain when we measure student learning? How do the forms our assessments take really help us to understand what a student knows or doesn't know, can do or can't do? Do we design our assessments to measure the quality of a student's thinking? To measure the process that student goes through? The grappling he or she experiences in an effort to learn a difficult concept? Or do we design our assessments in an effort to make it simpler and easier for us to evaluate students, to quantify their performance, and to assign them grades? In a way, it's important to think about what the point of measuring this stuff is in the first place. We're finally to a point in the evolution of scientific inquiry where we have begun to study and understand how memory works. It's taken us thousands of years to get here, but we can finally rest assured because the data tells us exactly what we knew all along. Mostly that we learn stuff and then we forget it. For how many of you is the memory of sitting in a high school science classroom more vivid than the actual knowledge you were intended to gain from that experience? How many of you remember the dramas that took place in the hallways or dormitories better than you remember your Latin conjugations? So you remember the classroom and you remember the space. You might remember an argument you had with a classmate, but you don't necessarily recall all those facts and formulas you used to answer 15 multiple choice questions on a chemistry quiz. Well, that is, perhaps unless you're a chemistry teacher. The fact of the matter is, we remember some things and we forget others. Oftentimes, the kinds of information that get encoded into our long-term memory are associated with strong emotional experiences. Facts and figures fall to the wayside because they have little to do with how we form our identities. It's one reason there is some truth when you hear the age-old adage, "Why do we have to know this? How is this relevant to our lives?" In fact, those questions get at the heart of the problem. When what we experience makes sense to us because we understand how relevant it is to our lives, we are more likely to remember it. When it doesn't, our brain sees no point in having it take up valuable space. So you know what it does? It tosses it. The truth is, we forget. We forget so much. Forgetting is one of our brain's best and most developed functions. It sifts through all the information coming in, holds on to it for a little while, comes back to look at it, assesses whether or not it thinks it's really going to be valuable, and then makes the decision to hold on to it or forget it. Sound familiar? It should. Our curricular calendars in school are designed in a way that capitalizes on this natural function of learning and forgetting. It's what we put our students through all the time. We tell them, you have got to learn this stuff. There's a test coming up. You'll be expected to know X, Y, and Z. What'll happen? Well, the student's brain considers this scenario and thinks, if I don't know X, Y, and Z, what'll happen? I'll probably get a bad grade. If I get a bad grade, I'll probably do poorly in the course. If I do poorly in the course, my GPA will drop. If my GPA drops, I'll never get into college. If I never get into college, my parents will kill me. I want to live. I want to get into college. Therefore, I need to know X, Y, and Z. So, they learn X, Y, and Z, because at that moment, it makes sense why it's relevant to their life, right? But 3 weeks from then, next semester when they're in a new course, next year, does it ever have as much bearing on their future as a successful college graduate as it does at that moment when they're learning it in order to prove they know it or show that they can do it on your test? Give them that assessment when they graduate. Do they pass? Have they held on to the information? Perhaps not. At the beginning of this year, I was interested in getting student perspectives on a number of topics pertaining to their education, especially on what they thought about these indicators of their so-called achievement that we call grades. I sent an email to all 800 of our students asking them, what should grades reflect? And I gave them space for a free response. You'll notice there's a link at the bottom of this screen. You can't copy it, but if you'd like to type in that link, it'll bring you to a spreadsheet that'll show you all the responses that I received. Particularly, I've been interested in why and how grades motivate students and have seen from my own experience how student identities are molded by grades. Students often feel that our educational systems have come to identify individuals based on the grades they get. You hear teachers and students alike referring to a kid as an A student or a B+ student and so on. When grades don't line up with the identity students have come to know they should, they inevitably get frustrated. The pursuit of getting the right grade no longer becomes a facet of a dynamic motivational system. It instead turns into an unhealthy drive to maintain one's identity. In the example on the left, we see qualities that are rarely measured by tests, mostly because we as assessment designers have never been trained to measure those qualities. On the right, a reader of my Tumblr blog expresses that she feels the educational system limits her self-worth because it limits the range of intelligences that she's permitted to express in school. Here, in this clip, a fourth former at Lawrenceville discusses how grades have the potential to change the nature of student motivation for the worse.
I think the scary part about grades happens when people let it go from being one of many motivations to the only motivation, and that actually happens very often. And once it happens, it's hard to really kick that mindset.
So back to the survey. Of 800 students surveyed with the question, what should grades reflect? I got 107 responses. The numbers could have been better, surely, but I was more interested in the quality of the responses than anything else. I chose to filter the responses through the lenses of effort/process and performance/mastery. Now, I teach a number of design courses and have always struggled with this difference in my classes. Should grades be about the quality of the work in the end, or the effort that goes into that student making gains? It's a hard question, and I was curious what the students thought. In order to break it down, I filtered out the responses that used words associated with process and effort, and then I did the same for performance and mastery. What I found was that 57% of students polled clearly thought grades should reflect their effort. 43% thought mastery and performance were more important. I recognize that students desired to be awarded and honored for their effort more than for acing material, for the most part. Perhaps they sense that assessments are limited in what they can measure and that they don't fully take into account the qualities that are more challenging for us to measure. Because I can't list all of the spreadsheet data in this video, I included a couple of student testimonials about grades. You're of course welcome to scroll back in the video and copy the links to the spreadsheet data to see more of the student opinions. In this clip, a fourth former at Lawrenceville responds to the prompt, "What should grades reflect?"
Your grades should reflect the quality of what you're contributing to class, whether that means writing the right answer down on a piece of paper or drawing a relevant and original conclusion from something that you read. And usually your teachers will go to tests, essays, grade discussions, debates, presentations, or any other way that they have for helping you demonstrate your understanding of what they teach you. And the higher your understanding, the better your contributions to your personal performance and the class learning environment. And obviously it would be nice if we just tried hard and got good grades, but trying hard and getting results and learning is better than putting in effort and not absorbing the material. And since you're in class to learn, the grades you get from a class is a way of quantifying how much you've learned, whether it be a number or a letter. It's a good way of showing you from your teacher how much you are absorbing and how well you are performing.
Fourth former at Lawrenceville as well also responds to the prompt, "What should grades reflect?"
Reflect mastery of course material and the ability to apply one's learning in a new context. Now, regarding the two schools of thoughts on grades, which are grading based on effort versus grading based on merit, in the perfect world, merit would be a direct function of effort, but since it's not, the most accurate representation of students' learning is measuring competence through assessment. Students learn differently. Some need to constantly ask questions and participate, and some don't, and it's unfair to penalize based on learning style. In more objective assessments like multiple choice tests or math problems, evaluating mastery could be as easy as writing a percentage based on how many questions are answered correctly. The tricky problem comes in open-ended evaluations like essays, where it's impossible for a teacher to isolate the end product. Teachers have to evaluate on a vague standard. The wrong thing to do here is to grade horizontally, which is to say evaluate in comparison to the rest of the class. Because like the whole cliche about outrunning a lion, students only have to do the best out of the class, which takes away from the quality of the work. Instead, grades should be earned on a vertical standard, which will reflect performance based on a constant predetermined standard. Grades shouldn't be a sum of arbitrary weighted percentages. It's pointless for teachers to tell students at the beginning of a course that each test will constitute 15% of the final grade, or that quizzes will be 8%. That just feeds our grade-oriented culture. The best indicator of a good grading system is when the student ends a course not knowing his grade until he's given it, and not caring, because as corny as it may sound, the learning itself is 1,000 times more valuable.
Now, I was very impressed with the depth of the student responses, and it drove me to think about what the teachers might say in response to the same question. But I actually considered that most of our students thought grades should reflect effort. So I gave 100 plus of our teachers an open response question related to the issue of grades and effort. I asked, instead of the same question, I asked, what consideration do you give to effort when you assign student grades? Again, the link below or on the screen will give you access to the responses the teachers gave. Of the 32 respondents, which also wasn't an ideal number of responses, but was okay, it was overwhelmingly clear that effort was a marginal consideration or a basic expectation of the course, and this isn't out of the ordinary for independent schools. However, after reviewing the results of both surveys, I was intrigued that there is a distinct difference in perception between what students and teachers believe grades should and do reflect. Teachers, using assessment as a mode to quantify student performance, often give little weight to the unmeasured aspects of a student's performance when they assign their grades. So what? I am not saying that either the performance/mastery camp or the effort/process camp is right in this case. We're kidding ourselves if we really think that we choose to measure the things we do because it's what's truly best for preparing our students to live fully and authentically in the brave new world of 21st century society. We're embedded in an educational system, one where we've layered new expectations, practices, and policies on top of old ones over and over again for hundreds of years. It's challenging even to think about redesigning the system from the ground up, so we settle for the language of reform, of safe risk, and of compromise. From this inquiry about grades, assessment, mastery, and effort, I've come to take some safe risks of my own in my classroom. I've learned that honoring student voice is valuable in helping them to take ownership over their own learning. And in doing so, I've looked for ways to design my assessments and grading schema so that I can better honor, and more substantially, the quality of their effort. Mostly, I've learned to do it because I've realized that my job isn't totally about making them come only to embrace that which I think is important. Instead, as educators, we need to learn to also give credit to what our students believe to be valuable, even if that means we have to conjure new ways of designing our assessments to measure those qualities.